Good evening, everyone. I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and acknowledge the Mayor, fellow councillors, executives and my fellow residents of the City of Canning. Thank you for inviting me to be the second speaker, and I understand that Jim was pretty in your face and, as the Mayor said, really provided a sense of buoyance. I think I'm going to be much more sobering this evening, but your third speaker, Richard Weller, who will speak to you next month, is a man who's been looking at how Perth fits into its urban setting and its native landscape. And he has a series of very evocative images that he'll show you so that you can really respond to how you think the Perth of the future is physically going to look. Tonight I'm going to concentrate on some of the challenges that are facing Perth as a metropolitan area and some of the challenges that I see particularly in the city. So I run a think tank focused on Perth's future, and when I'm talking about Perth, I'm talking about metropolitan Perth. And we're funded by the business community, some of the biggest brands that are operating in Perth that also operate in the global stage, so companies like Rio, BHP, Woodside, etc. And they pay me to advance the discussion about the Perth of the future, thinking about how it fits locally, within the national framework, and also within the international context. It's a very challenging role, I have to say, and I only have $1 million a year in which to do my work, so we rely very heavily on having consultations and collaborations with organisations like local government, state government and a number of peak bodies. So my observation is that Perth is having a growth spurt of stellar proportions. It's like when your toddler starts to grow and a pair of pants that fitted one week don't fit the next. And that's how it feels a little bit in Perth at the moment. This sort of sense of having growing pains, traffic congestion, trains that are full, car parks that are full, queuing up to buy your groceries. It just really feels like we've reached that point where we've probably reached our natural limits for the infrastructure that we currently have. And as the Mayor mentioned, Perth is predicted to grow to 3.5 million people by mid-century. And I think that's going to be incredibly challenging for us all. I can't even imagine a city at 3.5 million. And what will happen is that this extensive growth will change our physical and cultural environments, and that's where I'm going to plan some of my sort of commentary tonight. I hope that I will, in talking about growth and the challenges, I hope to sort of inspire some of your thinking when you set about doing your community planning in a very formal sense after you've heard from the series of speakers, because we'll all have very different perspectives, but I think that we're all trying to add to your debate and discussion on the future of the City of Canning. I'm going to concentrate on 4 issues. There's so many I could concentrate on, so I'm going to concentrate on population growth itself and the changes that will bring to your cultural and demographic structure, population ageing and how do we actually have a skilled labour workforce, and the globalisation and rise of Asia in the world economy. So I plan to spark the debate about the Perth of the future, who we're planning for and therefore how we need to plan. The first and overriding issue in all of this is about growth. The growth that will be experienced in the Perth metropolitan area as well as locally within the City of Canning. So just to think about where we're at the moment, current ABS predictions suggest that the Perth metropolitan region currently sits at about 1.65 million people, and Canning makes up 90,000 people of that, about 5.5%. The population is expected to grow to 2.4 to 2.9 between to 2031 and 3.5 million by 2050. If the City of Canning was to absorb population on that sort of 5.5% average, what that means is that by mid-century you'll have 200,000 people living in the City of Canning, double your current size. The second issue to consider is who will we be planning for? And so what we really need to do is look at the makeup of the community today. According to the latest census data, Perth has a median age of just 36, a pretty young city. And Canning tracks perfectly against that. What you've got though is a very noticeable difference in your community, that you have a higher proportion of the 18 to 24-year-olds, and I think that'll hold you in particularly good stead. In terms of where we come from, 29% of Perth residents identify with English ancestry, and 25.5% of us consider ourselves of Australian ancestry. So we've got a real dominance of white European heritage, and Perth has the highest proportion of English-born residents out of any other city in Australia. However, Perth is actually quite diverse. The Office of Multicultural Interests tell me that there's some 200 different nationalities represented in Perth's population, and our diversity is increasing, which is something that's also very much reflected in your own local community. I think this provides us with an opportunity to be more welcoming and tolerant of newcomers. After all, we've been adding to the population in an Indigenous sense for tens of thousands of years, and in a colonial sense over the last about 185 years. And what this means is that you'll be able to tap into new cultures and talents and enrich our own. This is an opportunity we're yet to realise, and I think it's because it's something we're a bit afraid of, which probably is due to our sort of traditional desire to take people who are like ourselves, people who've got a colonial past like us. And some of it's probably left over from federal government policy, like the White Australia policy and the assimilation policies that we've probably not yet shaken off. And this has been reinforced by migration patterns which, overtly or not, have meant that we have had migrants predominantly coming from the United Kingdom, Ireland and Europe. And as I said, they've been a very good cultural fit with the Australia that they found themselves in. Perth's development, culture and lifestyle offering has matched up well with their needs and aspirations. So it hasn't been too much of a rub. But if you think about it, it hasn't really been that simple. We've encountered a big cultural shift before, when the Greeks and Italians came as skilled workers in the 1950s. This was very big and controversial in its time, although it seems to us now something that's quite benign. With hindsight, I think we could all say that those skilled workers added a lot to the nation building that we needed at the time. We didn't have a workforce in our own right that could have built the bridges and roads and dams, etc. As a demographer and social commentator, Bernard Salt recently observed that without Mediterranean migration, we would still be a nation of tea drinkers. And interestingly, in the 1970s, we moved from tea drinkers and became coffee drinkers. That wasn't something that I knew myself, but I suppose it's a sort of reflection of shirking off some of that Britishness of us. And my observation is I couldn't live without Italian food, and I think spaghetti bolognese has just become one of the Australian staple meals, and we probably think it's our own. However, the next major change in who we plan for will be fuelled by a migration shift if current trends prevail, and if the predictions like those of Bernard Salt will result in what they are now calling the Asianisation of Australia. As a community, the City of Canning is already dealing with some of these challenges, with a noticeable decrease in British-born and migrants with English as their first language, and you're experiencing an increase in Asian and Middle Eastern countries whose first languages are Mandarin, Cantonese, Malay and others. The changes also brought about a shift in religious prevailing, so that you have had a very predominant sort of Christian community, and now you're having one that's tending to have increasing Islamic faiths. As a community, only you can reflect on how you feel about these changes and how you respond to them. However, it's the role of local and state governments to think about how these changes will affect the way we plan for the future. Traditionally, there has not been a lot of thought by planners about planning for a future population in terms of its cultural and demographic trends. So this is something that's fairly new. Because what's typically happened is there's been a lot of straight line analysis. So we've looked at an increasing population, we've calculated out the number of households we're going to need based on a sort of standard household size and format, and then we've just zoned enough land to accommodate those people. But we're probably at a pressure point now where we just can't keep doing that. And what this has resulted in is very low density, single housing type suburbs, and that's Perth, a central business district and full suburban corridors. This has probably served us quite well up until now, but I think a one-size-fits-all approach will not serve us well into the future. For example, the City of Canning has a growing number of single-person households and couples without children, but the majority of your housing, like the rest of Perth, is just single detached dwellings. Obviously, a doubling of the city's resident population over the next 30 or 40 years will mean that there will need to be more medium and high density housing in order to fit everyone in. It's just simply not going to be possible to forever sprawl outwards, because otherwise you're going to start compromising some of your natural environments, and I don't think you'd want to do that. So we're going to have to think about the types of housing that is going to be required in this sort of medium and high density living, but also how the change in cultural form may also need a requirement to adapt housing as well. So, it's not also the housing, but it's also the neighbourhoods in which we want to live in and the communities in which we want to thrive in as well. So we talk about the need for more compact, walkable and diverse neighbourhoods in order to make a place more sustainable. But as Perth grows, will it be possible that all of these characteristics can go into the mix so that we can still have a Perth that's highly livable, but one of the things that comes with our sort of desire to be highly livable is that we have one of the biggest footprints of any city in the world because we're incredibly greedy about how we consume resources, and that's obviously not sustainable either. So there's a couple of big issues at play here, and one of them is about creating and maintaining a viable workforce for the Perth metropolitan area and within your own community. Perth is already emerging as the resource capital of Australia, and we have a high-performing economy, which is very enviable. Most of us know that in order for a city to retain its economic performance, let alone accommodate any economic growth that we might experience, we need a workforce that contains highly professional, skilled individuals, as well as workers for our service and health sectors. Yet our population is ageing, and I think the teaching profession as one has fessed up very recently to say that most of the teachers are over 50 years of age, and many of them are going to be retiring in the next 10 years. So the only way that we're going to be able to meet workforce demand is through immigration, and that's a policy set at the national level. The Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Western Australia claims that we need 400,000 extra workers, most of these which cannot be homegrown. And research undertaken by ASOR Tasman says that these people will predominantly come from non-Anglo countries. This seems to me to be inevitable when you consider current migration trends, as well as factors of globalisation and the rising prominence of Asia. By this I'm referring to increased integration and competition within international economies, and the rise and strength of Asia, the Asian economies, which we are close to both in an economic and geographic sense. For example, in 2009, China replaced Japan as Australia's most important export market, with exports valued at 38 billion, as compared to 42 billion to China. Just 2 decades earlier, Australian exports to Japan were only at 13 billion, and more than double of that of our next most important partner at that stage, which was the United Kingdom at just 6 billion. And the importance of this relationship is likely to increase. And at this point I'll probably pause to say that some of the work that we've done around visioning the Perth for the future is that we've spent too long in Western Australia, and particularly in Perth, gazing east and being obsessed with what's happening in Sydney and Melbourne and feeling like the poor cousin. And it's probably this century where we can reorientate ourselves north and feel confident about our place in the Australian economy, but particularly about our closeness to Asia, which is enviable for those cities. And I think they're just starting to wake up to that.